All right, welcome everyone to this midweek teaching. And today we're going to try to do a brief teaching because I was asked a question about Pharaoh and what would happen to someone like Pharaoh. And so that's a big question, and it's in a huge, awesome book called Romans. So I can't do the entire section. But what I want to do today is focus on a line that was shared in Romans 9, which is fitted for destruction, because it appears that Pharaoh was fitted for, which really essentially means suited for destruction. So what I really want to do, though, is focus on the word destruction, because we have a tendency that when we see a word like destruction, when we read the Bible, we have a tendency to think that, oh, that's, annihilation in the lake of fire, or that's, eternal conscious torment in some kind of, infernalist location. But I'm going to suggest to you that that is not the case, and that's not how destruction is used in the Bible. In fact, most of the time, there could be some exceptions, but generally speaking, destruction means ruined. It means the removal of blessings. So, for example, one of the biggest destructions we all know of is Noah and the flood. Well, was the earth completely annihilated? No. People continued to exist. The earth continued to exist, and everything was remultiplied, if you will. And certainly there was at least 8 souls, if you will, as Peter mentions, that were saved. But it still doesn't change the fact that the destruction of the earth was not the annihilation of the earth. Same thing with a lot of destructions in the Bible, right? So in the Roman-Jewish War, for example, right, Israel was destroyed, but the land still exists. There are still people that are Jewish today, et cetera, okay? So destruction means ruining or a removal of blessings or a removal of protections, if you will, and good things. That's essentially what it means. If I were to be pragmatic today, I probably used the example before, God forbid someone has a flood in their basement. You say, oh man, my basement is destroyed, but really it's not completely annihilated. You still have much of the walls, probably a lot of the paintings, but you've got some rugs to pull out and some certain perishables that have to be replaced, et cetera, et cetera. And that's actually what destruction means. So oftentimes when they see Pharaoh fitted for destruction, if you will, kind of assembling that a bit, they immediately think a lake of fire when they're reading the Bible. And I don't think they should do that. I think that's an error. All right, so let's go check that out. Let's get that out of the way. This is going to be a little bit at a time. We're going to have to work this out a little bit at a time. So I want to focus on that part first so that we don't think that this is about hell. Okay, so let's go there. All right, so Romans 9, as you can see, and I'm going to just read the specific verse here. It says, what if God, willing to show his wrath, which is a passionate outburst, and clearly when God shows that, it's against things that are happening that are extremely evil and wicked and inappropriate, and to make his power known, okay? And I just want you to know that in making his power known, the context just up here in verse 17 is he makes an example, if you will. Here is where he says, even for this same purpose have I raised thee up, that I might show my power in thee, and that my name might be declared where? Throughout all the earth. Okay, so this is so his name would be declared throughout all the earth. So that's the realm that we're talking about. So when you get here and he talks about making his power known, he wants everyone on earth to know who God is, because up until that point, I'm going to suggest there's a good portion of people that thought the Egyptian Pharaoh was God, or at least God-like. And so when you take the one who believes or is convincing everyone he's God, and then you show up to witness against all his wickedness that he was putting on the Israelites, that's how God is making his power known, right? And that's how his name will be declared throughout all the earth, right? And so notice, and this is in question form, by the way, what if God, willing to show his wrath, his passionate outburst, and to make his power known in all the earth, endured with much long suffering? So there's the character of God. He was tolerating and enduring what? Pharaoh's behavior, Pharaoh's continuing wickedness, and how he was treating the Israelites. All right, and I could take you to Exodus 1. Today I won't, but as we move forward in tackling Romans 9, Pharaoh out the gate started doing really inappropriate things. But he endured with great patience. There's that mercy. There's that long suffering, right? And he endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath. Let's talk about that for a moment. God is not the vessel, obviously. This would be the people. Let's say in this case, let's say Pharaoh, right? So he's a vessel of wrath. So he's talking about basically what if God is willing to show his wrath upon the wrathful vessels, right? The angry, tyrannical vessels, okay? Because that's what Pharaoh was. He was a tyrant. And of course, suited for is essentially what fitted to destruction, right? So this is where we want to focus. So keep in mind this. Do you see the word hell anywhere in Romans 9? No. Gehenna? No. Lake of fire? No. Right? None of that kind of eternal fire? No. They will be burned in the fire? No. None of that. Right? No Hades, no Sheol, none of that. Right? So to make this into some kind of underground realm where people are being eternally and consciously tormented and or annihilated is an error. Because there's no talk here. You're stretching the word destruction to mean something that it doesn't mean in the context, because clearly he wants to make his power known upon the earth. That's what he's saying. And he wants his name throughout all the earth, right? To be known, right? Why? To let everybody know, no, Pharaoh's not God. I'm the true and living God, says Yahweh, right? So that's the context here. So I'm going to use another scripture to prove my point, all right? Where God uses the term destruction himself, all right? So we're going to go to Job 1 and 2. I'm not going to go through the entire text here, but Job is a really uprighteous man. He's a proper man if you read through it. And then, of course, Satan comes for some kind of counsel, some kind of heavenly counsel, all right? So this, by the way, defies that position where God can't stand to be in front of anything evil. Well, how can he have a conversation with Satan then? if we're going to say that Satan is, inappropriate and evil, well, then no, God doesn't have a problem being around things that are evil and do wicked things, okay? So that whole kind of, dogma needs to be put away. But anyways, in verse 7, he says, "And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then answered Satan to the Lord, he said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth? A perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and eschews evil. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Does Job fear God for nothing?" So this is the accusation that Satan is coming up with. Verse 10, he says, "Hast not thou made an hedge about him and about his house and about all that he has on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now and touch all that he hath, and he will curse you to your face." So that's the accusation. Job only praises you because you've got him protected and you keep blessing him. But I'll tell you right now, he'll turn on you on a dime if you let me have Adam, right? So God permits it, okay? So for time's sake, we continue. And basically, Job is super wealthy, loses his wealth, his cattle, his servants. He has children, all the children in one building, if I recall correctly. The building smashes and all his children die and pass away in this huge accident, okay? And so now goes to chapter 2. It says, "Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, From whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord, said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? And still he holdeth fast his integrity." We're going to pause here because Job did not sin. Okay? He did not sin. He held it together. And that's why God says, and still he holds fast to that integrity. See how Job proved you wrong, essentially, is what's going on here, right? Then he says this is very important. "Although thou moved me against him to destroy him without cause." Wait a minute. Destroy him? Does that look like destruction to you? Of course, that's the same word, right? Destroying, destruction. This is God saying, even though you moved me without a cause to come against him and destroy him. Well, wait a minute. Job's not even dead physically. From a physical point of view, he's completely healthy. From a spiritual point of view, I could even argue he's healthy because he didn't even sin with his lips against God. And he still has his wife. So essentially, God is saying that you move me to destroy him by doing what? Removing that protection, right? Removing those blessings, removing his wealth, right? Causing a huge emotional, distraction, if you will, or destruction by allowing Satan to destroy that building where the children were. So he had huge family destruction. He had huge wealth destruction, right? But he himself is not destroyed. And there's no talk of hell here either, of course, right? So you have to keep the same kind of context. So this is why I'm using this as my verse to show you that destruction doesn't mean immediately goes to hell for hellfire, eternal conscious torment. That's not what it means. Okay, to destroy him meant to remove his blessings, to remove that protection, if you will, and to allow Satan to come and remove much of his wealth and things of this nature. But he still had his health and he still had his wife. Okay, so I hope this helps you understand the destruction in Romans 9. So going back to Romans 9, when you read this now, it says, what if God, willing to show his wrath and to make his power known, which we know is throughout all the earth, is what we're going for here, and endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath, meaning Pharaoh, he endured much long suffering with Pharaoh, fitted to destroy him, right? So that he would make his power be known. And the vessels of mercy, who was that? Right? Because he says in the next line, and that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy. Right? Who's the vessels of mercy? Who did he give mercy to? The Israelites who were under bondage under Pharaoh, where Pharaoh was completely mistreating the Israelites. So he showed mercy to the Israelites because they were the ones being attacked and harmed all the time, right? And he made his power be known. And where did he do that? Upon the earth. And he made his name go throughout all the earth since then. And even to this day, we know we get the Passover weekend. Okay, think what you want about the movie, but the 10 Commandments, right? And the whole thing with Pharaoh there. Okay, so when you see that, you're going to have to see that this is what the context is here, at least to help you understand that this is not about a spirit or a soul going to eternal conscious torment. See, when you stretch it into that, now you're coming to this kind of interpretation that goes against all kinds of other scriptures where God says, my anger be but for a moment, but my mercy endures forever, and I will not cast off forever. And I did that mercy over anger video, clearly showing that God's mercy outlasts any angry, wrathful outburst. Usually the wrath has to come into taking care of wickedness, right? To taking care of that problem. And he's very long suffering for it. So to stretch this into that position, because you see the word destruction is a huge error. There's some other huge errors. So I'm going to briefly point them out. I'm just going to take you real quick to Romans 5. So Romans 5 is prior to Romans 9. So if you don't take the information that's in Romans 5 as you move forward, right, then you're not going to understand Romans 9 because Romans 5 is before Romans 9. And so you have to carry this forward, all right? So let's take a look here in Romans 5, verse 12 to 14. It says, wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world. Who's that? That was Adam, right? And death by sin. What kind of death, though? We have to nail that down. If Jesus came to repair physical death, if Adam brought in physical death, then Jesus didn't repair physical death. So we have a huge problem. He didn't reverse that curse because people have been dying for 2,000 years, give or take, since Christ, right? But I'm going to suggest to you that that's not the death that was brought in. It was the covenantal death, okay? Now, some people say spiritual, and that's fine, but I'm going to lean more harder towards the covenant death. Okay, because Romans 9 talks about how the Israelites received the covenants, right? And Jesus brought in the new covenant, the covenant that was an everlasting covenant, right? So death by sin, you have to understand, is a covenantal death, and or if you want to go with spiritual, that's up to you. I don't believe, because in the Old Testament it talks about every spirit goes back to God. Okay, so I'm going to suggest to you strongly that this death, is a covenantal death. Okay. So sin entered into the world through Adam because of the covenantal death by sin, because he broke the covenant. And so death passed upon all men. Okay? That all means all. I don't think any Christian would disagree. For that all have sinned. Right? Then he says this, for until the law, and he's speaking about the law of Moses clearly, sin was in the world. And if you want proof really briefly, it's clearly talking about Moses there. So he's talking about the law of Moses. For until the law, sin was in the world. So sin existed even prior to the 10 Commandments and etc. But sin, this is huge, is not imputed, I repeat, is not imputed when there is no law. When was Pharaoh? Pharaoh's prior to the law of Moses, because until Moses showed up and kind of did his representation and had his battle, if you will, until Pharaoh released finally the Israelites, if you will, or God made sure that they were released. And then it was right out there. And then the 10 Commandments and the ordinances and the Torah was given after Pharaoh. So do you see what that says there? Sin is not imputed when there is no law. Okay, so unlike the human race, it says ignorance of the law is no excuse. Well, that's not how God operates, right? If you don't know, then that does count in the judgment. Okay, so sin still was there, as again, I have to repeat, the sin was there, that's what he's saying, right? And so that covenantal death passed on by one, right? Jesus, by one, repaired the covenantal death. Okay, so by one it came in, the covenantal death, and by one it was reversed. Okay, so sin was in the world, okay, for until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Pharaoh falls under that time frame. Okay, then it continues and says, nevertheless, death reigned. Covenantal death reigned from when? Adam to Moses. Why to Moses? Because the law of Moses was unable to reconcile mankind to God, because everyone needs mercy. That's why. So that's why the promise of the new covenant, the everlasting covenant through Christ. So until the end of the law of Moses, which would have been, I'm going to suggest, either at the cross and or at the destruction of Israel, Jerusalem, and the temple, I'm going to suggest the law of Moses, the covenantal death was repaired at the cross. That's why he said it is finished. But the fulfillment of all the law and the prophets, because part of the prophecy of Israel was that there was going to be the destruction of the temple, didn't happen until 70 AD. Okay? And that was the inauguration, the actual official start, in my opinion, of the church and the official inauguration of the new covenant. However you want to look at that, that's a zone. Pharaoh is way before that. Way before the covenant that was handed to the Israelites, Old Covenant Israel. And that's why it says, nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over them that had not sinned after the similitude of Adam's transgression, who is the figure of him that was to come. And he's talking about Jesus there. So Adam was the one who sinned. And even though these folks did not sin like Adam did, they still were sinning, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. All right, so you have to carry that understanding into Romans 9. And Pharaoh fits into that position. Okay? Now, I could go deeper into this, but I'm just wanting to be cautious with the timeline on this one because I want to ease into this, because Romans 9 is a heavy, heavy chapter, particularly because a lot of folks have made Romans 9 an island unto itself, and I believe that's an error. Okay? So you can't understand Romans 9 if you don't understand Romans 5. All right? And in Romans 5, it also says this, and you can't ignore this text. You have to carry this text into it. He wrote this before he wrote fitted for destruction. He wrote this before he wrote the section that's around Romans 9. Okay? So if you don't understand this and you're not accepting any of this, if this all gets flushed down the toilet, you're erasing these scriptures because of your interpretation of that one. Okay? Don't do that. You don't take a scripture and erase another one. I've talked about that before. And I believe that people who make Romans 9 an island to itself and create an interpretation out of it make that error greatly. 5:18 says, therefore, as by the offense of one, judgment came upon all men to condemnation, and that is clearly Adam, as we learned up here, right? As by one man sin entered into the world, death by sin, and death passed upon all. That covenantal death passed upon all. That's why he says here, therefore, as by the offense of one, judgment came upon all men. No one argues about that that's all, that All means all there, to condemnation. And then he says, even so by the righteousness of one, the free gift came upon all men unto justification of life. He says that in Romans 5. By the time you get to Romans 9, there are folks who have decided that God has predetermined that after the destruction on earth, somehow that must include the destruction of the soul and the spirit and eternal conscious torment in some other realm. But that would fly completely against the scriptures I've just shared with you that came before in Romans 5. So I'm going to suggest to you that the answer in completion of Romans 9, I'm just trying to get your wheels turning and get you to kind of maybe see these things a little bit differently, because if you have that lens on, you're not going to see anything differently. And that's why there's a lot of folks who kind of say, this is what the Bible teaches. You know, when you take that position, you're asserting that you actually know the Bible inside out and there's no one that can tell you anything because you already know the interpretation of all things. And I'm going to suggest that that could be a very prideful position, and God resists the proud. So remember, you might be interpreting Romans 9 wrong. It's possible. And I'm open to being wrong myself, but I see Romans 5 and what it says. So I'm not asserting that I know everything about the Bible, but I'm going to suggest that positioning, which essentially I think they call it double predestination, where God predetermines and creates certain people to go this way and, be big winners. And then God predetermines, that they're going to go that way and be big losers. And then on top of it, he's going to either annihilate them or torture them forever and ever, and that's awesome. Because, that's what Romans 9 says. No, that's how you're interpreting Romans 9. And you're not taking Romans 5:18 with you, that's for sure. And you're not taking Romans 5:12 to 14 with you. So that's it. And there's more scriptures I could provide, but I'm not going to. So what I'm going to suggest to you, at least not for now, because this would be, to do Romans 9, you'd have to go all the way to Romans 11. That's the bottom line. Okay? It really is. The answer in totality. So again, Romans 5, right? When it talks about the free gift came upon all men unto justification of life, right? The answer to that is in Romans 11:32 to 33. And this balances out perfectly with Romans chapter 5. And it's the answer from Romans 9. Where he says, for God hath concluded them all in unbelief. And that actually should be rendered out disobedience. Most translations say that. In fact, I might show that to you in this video as well. He says, God has concluded or bound them up in unbelief, or disobedience is a better rendering here, so that he might have mercy upon all. That's what he says. Does that line up with this? Yes. So by the righteousness of one, the free gift came upon all men unto justification of life. Romans 11:32. For God has bound them all in unbelief or disobedience, so that he might have mercy upon all. See that? So if you bind people up in disobedience or unbelief, right? Whichever rendering you want there, he's so that he can have mercy on all. That's the just position. Because everybody sins. So since everybody sins, the just position is mercy. So now the question is, how much mercy, to what degree? Because it is God who shells out the mercy, right? So he will have mercy upon all. To what degree and to how much he gives the gift is up to him. To what degree of mercy? So for example, when Jesus says something like, all the sins against the Son of Man shall be forgiven, but anyone who blasphemes the Holy Spirit, it shall not be forgiven. What he's saying there, right there, is there's two different kinds of sins, isn't it? Right? You can say whatever you want, but you yourself are saying that certain sins can be forgiven, which means to pardon, to be pardoned. And certain sins, when you blaspheme the Holy Spirit, those are not pardoned. What that means, to not be pardoned, means you are going to have to pay the full debt for that one. That's what that means. But see, since you have eternal conscious torment and or annihilation in your head, you assume immediately, see, he won't forgive you for that, and therefore he tortures you forever or he annihilates you. No, he's just saying that won't be pardoned, which means you'll have to pay the debt on that one. It's like getting a ticket, right? And you're driving 25 over and the police officer doesn't give you a break on it. He says, no, it was 25 over, 75 in the 50, and the ticket is whatever, $300, and you're paying the whole thing. You still get out of the debt. You just have to pay it in full. That's what forgiving the debt means. that you don't have to pay the debt on it. Okay? You don't attach it. Oh, say, well, I'm not going to forgive you. You do have to pay the debt. That means what? You have to pay it. But once it's paid, it's done being paid. It means you'll have to pay it. You're associating that, just like with destruction, you're associating it immediately with hell, which clearly can't be possible because Job was destroyed. God says so, and yet he was alive and so was his wife. See? So therefore, destruction does not mean immediately go to some kind of underground realm. In fact, it never means that, best as I could tell, right? Unless it's followed up potentially with some kind of punishment. We could talk about that, but clearly just saying fitted for destruction does not equate to a soul and a spirit going to some kind of underground realm. Just like here, you can accept that he's talking about mercy upon all in Romans 11:32, just like he's talking about mercy upon all and justification unto life upon all. You can decide to alter the definition of all, but you'll have to do that, won't you? Well, the problem with that is that here it says all men get the punishment, right, by the offense. And we know that that death, whatever that death is that Adam brought in, everyone got that, right? That's what he's talking about. So if it's everyone for that, then it's everyone for this. See? But what folks will do, they put the lens on, they go, well, this was for everyone, this one's not. It's for the special people. That's because you got the lens on. That's what I'm going to suggest. And you're not carrying in Romans 5 with you. And a lot of other things that are said through 6 and 7. Remember, guys, chapters were not in the original text. So this book is meant from front to back to communicate an entire message, not just one special one in Romans 9 for the special people. No. You're basically erasing these scriptures prior to Romans 9 and, quite frankly, the conclusion to Romans 9, because in Romans 9, let's remind ourselves of this, it starts essentially with a what if God, right? It's a question. Even as the Gentiles, there's questions here, and he's answering all the questions. So the conclusion ultimately is in Romans 11. I will do a more thorough teaching, guys, but this is going to be quite a big teaching. And that's why this week I'm going to be doing a video called All Means All, and I'm going to show you all the times, and I do mean it all the times that God uses the word all, that you're going to have to do a bunch of mental gymnastics where at times you're going to say, yeah, that means all. Yeah, that means all. Oh, no, not there. Oh, yeah, here, but not there. And it'll be like in the same verse, okay? And I'm going to show you that that's the problem when you put the lens on, all right? But before I finish that, I want to leave with 33, where it says, oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and the knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. So I think ultimately, folks, if any of us ultimately don't admit that, listen, if God says he's going to have mercy upon all, we may not understand how he's going to do it, what the processes are, but if he says it, then I believe it. If he says it in Romans 5, right, that the free gift came upon all men unto justification of life, then I believe it. Now, I believe that maybe we could be wrong as to how he's going to go about it, but of course, the writer here, which I believe is, again, I might have said it before, Tertius, but I think Paul obviously dictated it, that his wisdom and his knowledge is unsearchable, and his judgments are unsearchable, and his ways are past finding out, right? So maybe we're underestimating the mercy of God and what kind of great and awesome plans he has for everyone to ultimately reconcile all things, which is something we're going to hopefully, Lord willing, talk about this week. And I just want to mention one other thing. This is just something because it was a comment out there that a lot of times people will say, oh, well, a lot of they call someone like myself who believes that the book of Revelation, the entire Bible, is historical because Christ fulfilled everything and he doesn't have to come back to finish anything. He finished the work that he was supposed to do and he was called to do, and he's seated at the right hand of the Father, and he's above all powers and principalities. And so they call that full preterism. And oftentimes folks will say, oh, most full preterists believe this. Well, actually, I'm going to suggest I don't know what most full preterists think, but I know, for example, Don Preston, he does not believe what I'm saying. He has a different point of view. I believe he's more what people would call an Arminianist, okay? I think there's another gentleman named Michael Sullivan. He's a full preterist. He's a Calvinist. Really that simple. I believe, for example, William Bell, I think he's more Arminianist. And he believes, so all these guys, none of them believe what I believe. They believe, I think they all believe either annihilation, maybe Michael believes eternal conscious torment. I'm not really sure. So the idea that all people who view the scriptures the way I do have the same interpretation of other things. In other words, their eschatology means they automatically come to, they believe like Shay does. No, that's not true. So I'm just citing that. And that's okay. You're going to have to decide for yourself. I personally see what it says. And I take those words very seriously. I don't try to alter the meaning of the word all to suit any kind of preconceived notions. And of course, because I see those scriptures, which we talked about, mercy over anger, for example, and I saw, for example, how forgiving he was towards the Ninevites, how forgiving he was towards Israel, right? And how forgiving, quite frankly, he has been with me and merciful to me. And so that's his character. And so hopefully this has been at least a good beginning to maybe I know it's not a full explanation of Romans 9. I get that. But Romans 9 is a huge chapter. And again, part of the big work on that is I'd have to kind of pull some of that material that you might already think is, fact. That's part of kind of me presenting that interpretation. It's kind of like with the eschatology. If someone believes it's in the future, the first thing I have to do is at least bring them to a spot where they're willing to consider that it's not. So if you already are convinced of something, then it's going to be harder for you to hear another potential interpretation. So with all of that said, I hope that this has been at least helpful to start the conversation and to show you that I am coming from a scriptural point of view. I'm just carrying what was said in Romans 5, and I'm going to suggest 6, 7, and 8 into Romans 9, and I don't believe the complete conclusion of that section is until Romans 11:32, where God says that he will have mercy upon all. All right, so hopefully this is a good introduction to what I'm going to, Lord willing, produce this week, this Sunday for Sunday Night Scripture. And again, I think the title of that one's going to be All Means All. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun. And quite frankly, I think it's going to be really, really exciting. So hopefully you'll tune in for that. In the meantime, guys, thank you for giving me this opportunity to at least share a portion of some interpretation to kind of start kind of tearing down some of the things that I think are dogmas. And we're going to continue to do that so that we might be able to come to the scriptures with more humility, because we always have to remember that God resists the proud. So we want to tear down those dogmas, be as humble as we can, and see if we can't get a little closer to accurate with the scriptures. And hopefully we can work on that together and take on as much of this with humbled hearts. And hopefully we'll be blessed in the process. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening. Grace and peace.